Should've known better, and I can't feel no remorse. And you don't feel nothing back. I got a new girlfriend. Feels like he's on top. And I don't feel no remorse. You can't see past my blind eyes. Oh, Ophelia, you've been on my mind ever since the flood. Oh, Ophelia, heaven help a fool who falls in love. Got a little paycheck, you got big plans, and you got to move. And I don't feel nothing at all. And you can't feel nothing small. Honey, I love you. That's all she wrote. Oh, Ophelia.
All right, let's go ahead and get started. Okay, first off, just wanted to say hello to everyone. Really excited for this webinar. I want to welcome everyone to this episode of CX Power Hour, where we're going to be talking about what it means to create an agile customer support function and how you can go about building one. Just a little bit about me. My name's Chet. I work on the marketing team here at Forethought, and I'll be moderating this discussion. Before we dive into our discussion, I just want to review a couple housekeeping items. First, we'll have a Q&A section at the end of the discussion. If you have a specific question, please post it in the chat or in the Q&A section. If it's relevant to a specific talking point we're going through right now, I'll try to bring it up. If not, we'll cover it at the end. If it's directed to a specific panel member, please let us know and we'll have them answer that at the end of the discussion. Also, just so that everybody knows, this panel discussion is recorded and will be sent to all attendees. I know what it's like to be on a webinar, hear something amazing and want to jot it down, and then you miss something else. And so I don't want you to feel like you have to do that. That's always welcome, but just know that we'll send this out in a couple hours after the webinar. Lastly, I just wanted to put a plug in for our next webinar. We're going to be discussing how to use customer service as part of your overall business strategy. Oftentimes, people have looked at customer service as a cost center and not part of their growth strategy. So we're going to be breaking that down. We don't have the exact date, but that'll be happening in the next couple of weeks. So we'll let you know when that goes live. Now, before we get into the actual discussion, I want to take a minute to give each panelist a chance to introduce themselves and their company. Just to simplify things, let's go in alphabetical order. Alan, you bring a lot of experience to the table running supply chain teams at some pretty big companies like Sony Ericsson and Avaya, and most recently leading supply chain and customer experience for Republic Wireless, where you developed the machinery and concepts that has since become ArenaCX. When we talk about scaling an agile customer support team, that's really what ArenaCX is built to do. Can you tell us more about the concepts behind ArenaCX, kind of what led you to turn a solution you created for Republic Wireless into its own company?
Sure. Hi, Chet. Hi, John and Dion. Good to interact with you guys today and everyone in attendance. So thanks a lot for tuning in. So yeah, I'm Alan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of ArenaCX. It is correct. ArenaCX was built within the tech innovator Republic Wireless, that's now a part of Dish Network, as the platform that powers their customer service program. And we did use supply chain and risk management principles to build it. So that's relevant, I believe, to today's topic. And after incubating for a couple of years, we spun out as a venture-backed startup. So today we use technology and a marketplace platform to help companies find, manage, and optimize their outsourced business services. And we specialize in agility. A couple of ways that can play out, and we'll probably get a lot deeper into this as we talk, is that redundancy in resources tends to bring resiliency, and that leads to agility. So we help companies make their outsourced resources, A, more portable, much easier to transition between resources, and B, managed as a portfolio where you can dynamically shift and switch to rebalance your incoming traffic amongst the resource pool that you have available. And so these are traditional, tried and true supply chain concepts that we are applying to customer service labor resources for companies.
Thank you. Dion, I want you to take a minute, but before Dion, I wanted to introduce you with a little number from my friends, Bruno Mars.
I wanna be on the cover of Forbes magazine.
Dion, you and I haven't had a chance to talk since yesterday. Forethought has some kind of exciting news. Do you want to take a minute, introduce yourself, Forethought, and kind of what the announcement was yesterday and what that means for the future of Forethought and customer experience?
Well, thank you, Chet. I wasn't prepared to be embarrassed on the call, but I really appreciate that. Hi, everyone. I'm Dion Nicholas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Forethought. I have the pleasure of working with Chet here. And we build artificially intelligent agents to help businesses improve their customer experience. The news that Chet is talking about is that yesterday Forbes named us to their 25 next $1 billion startups list, which we're super excited and super humbled about. So very excited to continue to build the future. Thanks, Chet, for throwing that one out there.
You bet. I think it's not just a testament to what we're doing at Forethought. I think it really shows that business as a whole looks at customer service, the whole customer experience as part of the new growth strategy. It used to be just sales and marketing, product, right? But I think through the pandemic, people realized that customer experience is crucial. Customer service is crucial. And so I think it's awesome for us at Forethought to be able to have that, but it's also points to the industry as a whole and what all of us on this call are trying to do. Lastly, John, so we met the other day, and this is my fault. I didn't do my LinkedIn stalking in advance. Since then, I went kind of looking at your experience. I didn't realize you'd been at Microsoft for 17 years, Salesforce for 5 years, all running customer support teams. That's a really neat thing. We are very, it's just exciting to have you on the call to kind of learn from you. Now you're at Zendesk, which in my opinion is one of the pioneers of the modern day digital customer support experience. Take a minute to introduce yourself, your background, and for those that may not know Zendesk, hopefully most people do, but kind of what Zendesk is doing to help customer support teams.
You know, honestly, I appreciate being a part of this panel and group. And as you said, my experience and background has been completely in customer service and support, whether I started out as a technical support engineer and then moved into leadership over the years, understanding the Microsoft model, the Salesforce model, and now the Zendesk model. And so for Zendesk, it's really continuing to enhance the platform and our staff to be able to scale with what customers need and be completely flexible and extensible on how we get there. So I'm excited about my journey at Zendesk. I've only been here for about 5 weeks.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure in those 5 weeks, the teams are loving having you there. So you have an extensive experience running teams. Microsoft, I mean, that speaks for itself. Microsoft literally touches every computer we use. And so you're probably have come across a lot of different teams running that are being agile, a lot of them that just simply weren't. And so we're going to talk more about that. So we're going to talk about a couple of different topics throughout this discussion. First, I want to talk about just what it means to be agile. I think this has become somewhat of a buzzword in recent years. You know, the idea of agile principles has been mass adopted across software departments and other departments. You hear about Scrum and Scrum Master using Kanban. All of these different keywords or topics follow agile principles. The other day I was watching a video from a Zendesk executive. He was talking about agile and he says agility is just getting crap done, but it's also getting the right crap done and doing it well, right? And that's a pretty simple definition, and one that for me resonates a lot. But on the other end, agility is a lot more complicated than that. Aaron Desmet, I don't know if I pronounced that right. He's a principal and organizational design specialist at McKinsey. He defines agility as the ability of an organization to renew itself, to adapt, change quickly, and succeed in a rapidly changing, ambiguous, and turbulent environment. So a lot more descriptive there than just getting crap done. I think both of those are right. But Alan, I'd love for you to dive into this. When you think about customer service as a function, how would you define agility based on kind of what we've discussed already? What does that look like in customer service?
Sure. I may not be quite as sophisticated in the definition as the McKinsey one. I'll try to go just a bit north of getting crap done, and somewhere in between the two, we'll zero in on something. But in a background contextual definition, agility is just how quickly a company can adjust to ever-changing business conditions, and we know it's well known in other disciplines. You've already brought up agile development and software engineering, rapid releases, iteration based on feedback about the product. I think that's what a lot of folks mean when they say agility. But I also want to bring in a complementary definition, which is very mature in supply chain, which I mentioned earlier. Same concept, but here it's about how quickly a company can adjust manufacturing capacity and output up or down based on demand signals from customers. So how do we apply that to customer service? Well, one way is to think of a demand unit in customer service as a ticket or a chat or a call. The demand unit is not the headcount. The demand unit is the work output that needs to be performed. When you think of it that way, now you can start asking yourself, how quickly can my company adjust my customer support capacity and output potential in response to ticket demand or interaction demand signals coming in the support network? There's many ways to achieve this, and there's KPIs to track this that can be adopted from other disciplines. But that's what I wanted to kind of put on the table for discussion today is it's more than just being small bite-sized chunks that you can iterate and react to. There can be some discipline around it by interpreting the workload and the flow of interactions through the network as the demand unit that then you can align your resources against.
Yeah, I love that. Oftentimes we talk about, just like you said, headcount, how to become more agile, but the reality is it's the output. We don't look at customer support in terms of how many people do we have, but how many people can we support? What is our output? Any thoughts there, Dion or John, before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, I agree with that definition of agility, and it reminds me of there's this book by Andy Grove, High Output Management. It talks about managing and running businesses the same way you think about manufacturing, right? And so the ability to kind of break up the unit of work and think about that in terms of the customer demand and then adapt accordingly. I think that's where it all starts.
Awesome. I was talking with a university professor just a couple months ago about agile principles and methodologies, and he's like so many organizations right now, they talk about being agile, but the only thing they've changed in their organization is the actual vocabulary they use to describe their efforts. The reality is they're just as rigid in following the same long-term growth plans and strategies, and they're not agile at all. They're signing long-term contracts, they're going out and creating 5-year plans, trying to follow those, but they use agile concepts agile vocabulary words. So then they say, we're an agile team. Dion and John, both of you, when you think about an agile organization, we've all worked in agile organizations. We've worked in rigid organizations. What characteristics do you see when you see an agile organization? What does it look like from the outside looking in, so that people that may think that they're an agile organization, they can look at and say, hey, I don't check any of these boxes. Maybe I'm really not as agile as I think. Dion, and when you think of an agile organization, what does that look like?
One thing that's helpful for me is when I think about what's the opposite of an agile organization. This particularly is true in product development, is particularly true in customer success and customer support. Most of the time in a non-agile organization, you follow some form of a waterfall process, right? Your requirements are set at the beginning. That gets passed through to, call it the leaders. Then that gets passed through to the managers, which gets passed through to the actual frontline agents or workers, right? And this can be true for any kind of process, whether you're developing a product or adapting to customer support needs. And so flipping that, the most important thing in order to be agile when you're looking from the outside in is, where do the demands come from? Where do the requirements come from? Is it coming from some centralized source, or is it distributed down to, what I like to call the nodes or the leaves or the people actually doing the work? And so you start to see a lot more things like knowledge centered support, for example, in the support world, where your agents are not only responding to questions, but they're actually the ones updating the knowledge bases, updating the articles, and then giving that back to leaders. And so there are things like that you can actually start to see across many different processes that actually give you the signs that you're an agile organization.
And I'll just add that when I think of agility from a customer service standpoint, being agile versus a more rigid one, it's creating a competitive advantage where you can quickly adjust to the market changes, what customers are moving towards, and how quickly your organization can address those needs, and provides a competitive advantage for companies that think that way and move that way. Obviously, there's challenges to that, but the more that you can provide a listening system from the staff closely to what customers are experiencing, and then providing that listening feedback up into the organization from a product standpoint, then now the whole company's kind of gearing its approach to meet that customer demand and be flexible and extensible to grow in the future and scale as well.
Yeah. I think to both of what you guys were saying, it reminded me of my time, my last organization. Dion, you're going to shake your head. I don't think you can realize this, but the last organization, I actually ran our customer support team. We were a really small company, 10 employees. We had three of them were customer support. So I ran marketing and operations. And we had 3 customer support reps. And one of the things we talked about is, like, how do we go from being reactive to proactive? How can we go from not just responding, but actually looking at our strategy in the future, taking the data that we have and actually producing the types of knowledge-based articles specifically is what we discussed, so that we don't have to spend so much time being reactive, right? And then John, I loved what you said there. I think COVID was a good pulse check for everybody. When you think, I have an agile team. What happened during COVID? Were you fighting fires all the time? There's so many industries, when you talk about demand, increases or decreases in customer support demand. Some companies, like we had a customer in the ed tech space, right? And they just saw a huge increase in demand. Or other companies, they had a huge decrease in demand. And so if you struggled during COVID and are still struggling, then chances are there's some agile principles we can apply there. John, 17 years at Microsoft, nearly 5 at Salesforce. I'm sure you saw varying levels of agile versus rigid teams. How would you describe the difference between managing those two different types of teams? Like, what are the pain points you have in managing your agile or a rigid team? And kind of like, what was that relief or that biggest trial you had that was taken off your plate when you had a truly agile team?
Yeah, I think the difference is the ability to move quickly to changing what's going on from a customer standpoint. So you have feedback coming in, you know that there's changes that can be made to the product to better improve the customer experience. And yet in previous models and how everything has evolved to more the digital age and being responsive, and everything's moving much quicker now, even as I look at the past, that if you're not agile, it's going to impede your progress. And some of the companies that were not agile back in the day may not be around today, simply because they couldn't adjust quickly. So for me, it's really about continuing to get your voice heard, make the right changes, and manage through that so that you provide that justification. A lot of times, in my experience, the more rigid type of organizations, you had to prove it out in the numbers, the data, and the cost. If you could prove it out and show, hey, if we could make this change and reduce the cost and provide a better experience for customers, it took a lot of work, but that was the best approach to overcome some of the inertia in a rigid environment. In an agile environment, everybody's looking for that. They want that information. They want that feedback. So it's more of a collaboration than it is a siloed approach. So that's been my experience.
Awesome. One of the things we're going to talk about in the future is kind of those processes. We're going to talk about 3 pillars of creating an agile team. One of them is those, really understanding the processes that are needed there. So we're going to talk about that in the future here shortly. Alan, before we get into that, I wanted to ask you a couple of questions about just kind of like your thoughts on different sized organizations. You've seen this play out at larger organizations like Sony Ericsson, Republic Wireless, and now you're at a small organization in ArenaCX, right? You guys are kind of a startup like us. Smaller companies just are typically more agile by nature. You just have to be. It's really hard to have a centralized organization where everyone is following specific processes when everyone's wearing a lot of hats. What does agility look like at different company sizes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think as a mindset, it's similar. The principles apply regardless of size, but it's our ability to make use of those principles. And there's probably more than what I'll share. I'll just drop a couple highlights on here. So one, the company size may determine the levers you have available to pull. And so one example, it's a powerful lever to have baked in redundancy. And so, for example, if you have the volume and support demand to support multiple outsourced providers, you can construct a portfolio, and then your agility is increased because you're tapping into the strengths of multiple best of breed partners. And if one goes down, you shift to another. Small players may not have the volume to support more than one, and so they have to adapt and have different levers available to them. So I think it's important to kind of develop a playbook that's right for each individual company and the levers that are practical for that size. So this, in addition to kind of the levers available to pull, the other is kind of, I would say, the coordination required. And this is something, Chet, you were getting at. In a smaller company, everyone's wearing multiple hats. They're naturally collaborative because they have no other choice. The planning cycles of early stage companies may be in weeks instead of months and quarters and years. The bigger the company is, the longer the planning cycle, the more hierarchy, the more approval levels, communication protocols, and rigidity is going to just naturally set in as an organization becomes more complex. So I think it's a lot harder for a bigger company. This is where you need committed leadership. It doesn't come naturally. It requires planning. It requires kind of a relentless pursuit of agility to intentionally bake it in. This one of the things I like about Forethought so much is the name of your company. So every team I've ever led, when we list our values, I've always imposed Forethought as one of those. And I don't think that is magic. I don't think it's a gift. Forethought is earned through being prepared, using data to look ahead. And so if you can see something coming down the road, like or a slow motion train wreck happening, why are we waiting for the train to crash before we do something about it? You should see it coming if you're paying attention. And so I think bigger companies need to do that in a much more coordinated way. And therefore it's more difficult, and companies start agile and grow out of it. And you have to fight against that if you want to be agile.
Yeah, I think oftentimes that while process is a vital part of being agile, sometimes people process their way into being really rigid, right? They build really structured processes, multiple layers of approvals. If large organizations are especially prone to this, and it by design, they're not agile. And I like what you said about how agility really has to be organizational wide. It has to be part of your strategy. It's really hard for departments to be agile in a silo while specifically customer service, when marketing or sales or development or whatever becomes is really rigid. Agility really happens as an organizational strategy. So I love that. Before we move into our next topic, John, Dion, anything you wanted to add there?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things as I think about the differences in size and how that relates to agility. I think it depends on a few factors, including the cost of change, the risk of change, and the speed of change, right? How quickly can you move? What factors are at play and what strategically can you invest in to make that change. Obviously, the larger the company, the greater the resources, but there's still the accountability. And the smaller the company, obviously, the limited resources in terms of how do you best put those investments forward to be able to move where you need to go. So obviously, there's different factors considered for both. Some people would think a smaller team, hey, we can move really quickly. But again, I think Alan's thoughts around having forethought and strategy and thinking strategically is key to the success in a small organization.
You just teed up my next question perfectly. So thank you. One thing, when you think about agility, one thing people often ignore is your ability to actually be agile with cash flow and contract flexibility. Dion now, and as small business owners, you guys, this probably hits home more for you than maybe other customer service leaders. But at the same time, John, managing a large company like Zendesk, you obviously have contracts and cash flow problems just like everybody else. So when you're scaling a business and you're trying to grow teams, like what do you look at when you're considering those? Because oftentimes people are signing multi-year contracts from partners or suppliers, but at the same time, you need to be agile, and signing 5-10-year contracts obviously is not very common, but people still do it, sign longer contracts. Like how do you look at those in regards to, shoring up your resources, making sure you have them there available to you, but yet also making sure you have the cash flow and the flexibility that you need? Alan, do you want to lead that off?
Sure. Yeah, there's a lot of angles to take on that. So I'll maybe start with this one to say customer support, agility, and kind of that cash flow flexibility. If you're thinking about running a headcount-based support operation, you are locking in for a period of time to theoretically fixed capacity. So if you have 100 agents on the floor, you can do the work that 100 agents can do right now. That's your theoretical capacity. You also have kind of a fixed cost associated with that. That's the supply side of the equation. Demand side is customers don't know how many agents you have. They don't care. They're going to open tickets as long as your channels are going to let them come in. So the demand line is all over the place, whereas the supply line is fixed. So at any given moment in time, you either have too much capacity. In that case, you feel like maybe you're overspending, you're overinvested, or you have to make up work for people to do. Or the flip side, you don't have enough to demand to support it, and you're late on customer responses. Now you're disappointing customers because you're under capacity. And so solving for that problem is difficult when your contracts are long-term with fixed headcount, with minimum floors and lead times to change. And that's native to the whole outsourcing industry. And so that's not something I would expect many companies to have aggressively solved for, but it is possible to do that. And so we did just that at Republic Wireless. That's the foundation for ArenaCX, is creating that portability and the ability for supply to be dynamically adjusted to demand. And that directly affects cash flow. So you pay for what you need when you need it and not vice versa. So that's one response of probably many other possible ways to take that question.
Yeah, Dion, John, any other insight you want to provide there?
Yeah, the thing that comes to mind for me is that it also depends on what stage of company you're in. If you're in a, call it hyper growth rate, where things are constantly changing, then you kind of want to be in a state where you're just slightly understaffed at all times, but you're growing as you go, and you'll never have a shortage of work to do, so to speak. But then there's a world where you're in a more either flatter environment or something like that, when the most important thing is just customer quality, right? The most important thing is to make sure that you're hitting your SLAs. You probably have more resources to boot. And so it's okay to be slightly higher on the supply side than on the demand side to give that quality customer experience. And so I was just thinking about the idea that when is it better to be over-resourced or under-resourced? And it's highly a function of what environment you're in, and kind of choose your own destiny, so to speak.
Love that. So let's transition to our next topic, which is about what it takes to create an agile team. We've talked a lot about what an agile team looks like. When you think about operational agility and customer service function, I want to focus specifically on three major components. I've kind of alluded to these earlier. And so those are people, process, and technology. We're going to dive deep into some of these today. Actually, a member of ArenaCX's team wrote a great article on this. It's on your guys' on their blog post. So after this call, if you want to dig deeper into that, there's a great article on ArenaCX's website after this call. So when we talk about people, this includes who we hire, whether that's internal headcount, whether it's external resources. When we do it, how do we forecast for that? Alan, we'll have you talk about that. When we look at process, this is the end-to-end value chain activities. What are the different things we're mapping out on the whiteboard and putting into place? What are the metrics we're using to measure those results? And then lastly, technology. It's very important that we get the right people in the resources, the redundancies on the bus, right? And then the process mapped out to make sure that we understand what the customer journey is. How are we impacting them throughout it, making sure that we're, adding to their overall customer satisfaction. But without the right tools, the technology, it's really hard to do that. So the technology is there to augment and implement and support those first two pillars, right? And so those are the three things I want to talk about for the next, and really for the rest of our time here. Alan, regarding people, ArenaCX, that's what you guys do. You guys are a marketplace for outsourced labor where you guys are focused on the people side of agility. You've spoke to that already to a point. What are your thoughts on how, and the important parts that organizations need to consider when they're looking at agility from the people's perspective? When is it important to hire internally? When are you looking at bringing outsourced support? How do you forecast for that? And what are the different elements that people need to consider?
Yeah, great question. And we're a marketplace of outsourced service providers, got 50 plus BPOs in the marketplace, all handpicked, vetted, curated, terrific companies. So the question is, how do you know when to hire internally versus outsourced, and how to plan for that? So most people who aren't doing it don't think they're ready. I haven't met someone who's not doing it who says, I am ready right now. So there's always a feeling of risk, a feeling of uncertainty associated with it. And so I think if there's a business reason to do it, it's never too early to get started, but what's important is to de-risk it and be careful to do it strategically. So find an entry into it that's in a lower risk category of support or business or a small share, and then let it grow as the outsourced competency is demonstrated. So that's kind of the way our algorithms work in Arena, for example, is you can start small, and if that BPO proves itself relative to others in the network, then it can earn more share and grow into it. And so I would say starting safely is a smart way to do it, and grow only as you achieve competency. But don't think that you're too immature as a business to do it. Most companies start before their training is fully documented, before they have the kind of robust infrastructure that they might want. And oftentimes it's the outsourced service provider that can be utilized as a deliverer of best practices in the first place. So instead of thinking of them as a staffing agency for you that's doing everything according to your dictates, think of them as a true partner that wants to sit on the same side of the table with you, roll up the sleeves together, and collectively solve problems. And these companies do business with dozens of other companies and can bring ideas to the table as well. And that's what they specialize in. Can benefit from that along the way. As far as planning for it, there's a lot of factors involved. So your demand growth matters. The volatility of your demand would matter. Timing it, you probably wouldn't want to outsource the day before a pretty new product launch, or a very volatile period in terms of demand uncertainty. And so start when it's a smart time in your product and customer life cycle or company life cycle as you mature. And and have an exit plan. It's possible to make a false start. And I've met some companies who would say, I'll never do that again. They did an RFP, they picked one company, put all their eggs in one basket and got burned because the PowerPoint was so good, they were persuaded by it. And then they learned it wasn't the right fit. And so there are literally thousands of outsourced providers. Finding the right fit one does in fact matter, and being resilient and agile to be able to adapt if you realize you've made a misstep, rather than giving up on outsourcing. Using agility as part of your outsourcing strategy matters as well. So I think I've said a mouthful there. I'll turn it back over to the crowd. Yeah.
I appreciate that. John, I love your insight here. With your time at Microsoft, Salesforce, how did you go about, knowing when to hire, scale your teams, whether that be internally, outsourcing? What were the processes you went through? Because I love what Alan said, like most people don't think they're ready, right? But when you're ready, it's probably too late. Because when you need people today, that it's really too late. You haven't had that quote unquote forethought, as we talked about earlier. Like you want to make sure you're ahead of the game, right? You playing offense instead of defense. What's your experience there?
Yeah, there's a few things I think about when we talk about people. If we're looking at outsourcing or offshoring, it's strategic to your labor mix, right? So part of that is just understanding what portion of our business can we offshore at potentially a lower cost labor market that will save us money but help us scale, right? That's one part. And I do agree with Alan, we should consider them strategic partners, and they should work with us just as closely as we would our own staff, but also realize the redundancy there. So if you do have a site that goes down and you're offshored at a different portion of the globe, then you've got resources there available to help out, even if you have a business outage in a different part of the country or globe. The other piece that I think about is being able to scale at cost. When I think about staffing, philosophically, I think a lot of companies would say, hey, we're in a tiered approach. We hire in entry level at tier 1, then we move to tier 2, and then tier 3. The problem is with a tiered approach, you have all that inertia to overcome to resolve customer issues. So it creates a backlog, it slows things down, and negatively impacts customer experience. So over the past years, whether it's Salesforce and Zendesk is already in this model, is to move to a swarming type of approach where you hire in the resources that are able to scale with the complexity of your product. So you don't think about this tiered approach. You think about what skill sets I'm going to need to be able to grow with the complexity of the product, and then hire accordingly. But you use a swarming model to say, if you can't solve it, where are the resources to help you solve it? And then we all come together to work that model and reduce that inertia that it takes for customers so they have a better experience and provides greater throughput and efficiency outside of the tiered model. So there's a lot to that. But I feel like, what are the skill sets you're going to need to hire for the future, right? And look at that as your next wave of staff to bring in so that they can scale with the complexity of the product, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I love that. This kind of goes along with one of the questions that we just got asked from one of the audience members. Roy asked, what is a better choice, outsourced or your own customer service group? And I think the answer today is very different than it probably was 3 years ago. We were just talking the other day with Amanda, a member of the ArenaCX team, about what's being called the Great Resignation, right? And you have industries across, really all industries are having this problem where they're struggling to find the right type of talent that they need for the organization. And so I want you guys to answer this question, but my guess is, in regards to Roy, it really depends on your circumstances. But one of the things that you need to consider is, can I actually find the talent internally right now? Do I have the ability to find that right now? And so does it make sense to have the redundancy of having an outsourced partner while I try to build my core team? Love anyone's thoughts. Dion, Alan, John, how would you guys answer this question from Roy?
I'll jump in, but I'll be quick to save time for others. But I would say, should you insource or outsource? The answer is yes. redundancy matters. You want overlapping resource pools because you never know, will a computer system go down? Will there be a bad weather event in a certain area? Will a resource pool have some other wave of sickness? Could anything that could result in call outs or downtime? And so you want to have a diversified resource pool. I think that matters a lot. And I also believe that external hires add a great amount of leverage into your program. They tend to be able to hire a little faster, scale up and down a little faster, and they bring best of breed solutions to you that are, their whole business model is, I'm focused on delivering good customer service results for you. And if I fail to do that, you'll find someone else. So this is what they live and breathe. And if you treat them as a partner and give them a little flexibility to be themselves, they'll more often than not step up if you have the right kind of business partner.
Awesome. Thank you. Let's move into process. John, when you think about process, kind of whiteboarding, like what really happens when it comes to the customer service, our customer service model? What are the value chain activities? What are the metrics or KPIs, the SLAs? Like how do you go about, if you're a customer service leader, now you have extensive experience, but let's say you go back to when you're 5 years in, what do you know now that you wish you would have applied then to when it comes to creating the critical processes your team needs to have an agile team?
Yeah, I think there's probably a lot of different thoughts across the board, depending on the model that you're in. For me, it's focus on time to resolution. So the quicker you can resolve an issue, and I think we all see this in the customer service world, the more satisfied the customer is. So if you can resolve an issue within the same day or on the same contact, the customer satisfaction rate is going to go high. It's really around managing the tail. So how do we get to those issues that are long running, and what can we do from a process standpoint to bring the resources to bear to either one, resolve those issues where we don't have the knowledge, the right tools, the right information, maybe it's enablement from the engineering team, to help us get the right training that we need, or the right enablement or skills or resources that we need to help resolve those issues, but reduce the number of those significantly so that we're only sending the bug issues and the most critical issues to engineering to resolve, because those are valuable resources as well. But resolving those issues help. Also, I would say there is a large portion of customers that want to resolve issues on their own. They don't want to have to contact support. So the more vibrant you can make your knowledge, how customers interact with what you're providing from a help approach that they can resolve on their own, the better off you're going to be, because then that doesn't create an issue the customer can self-help and resolve. And it's not a case that they have to wait for a response from support. And the last thing I would say about all of that is being proactive, thinking down the road. So the best issue that a customer encounters is the one that never happened. So how can you get out in front of the types of things that customers may experience, especially in a cloud-based model and world, that you can help resolve so that a customer never has to contact support whatsoever? So there's that aspect as well. So I think there's a lot of different things, but if I would tell myself that 5-10 years ago, I think the progress of some of the support organizations I've worked in would have been much more advanced.
I love that. I think you said earlier in the conversation, you talked about listening to your customer. We're tying that back to what you just said, like in the end, I just want an answer. I don't care if I'm talking to someone live over the phone, if I'm chatting with someone, or if I just go and I find it on my own. Like in the end, like that's what I want. And so I love that there's so many different KPIs that customer support teams manage, and you focus on the one is time to resolution. How long is it taking me to have my issue resolved? So I love that. Anything anyone else wanted to add there when it comes to like the process part of this discussion?
Yeah, just wanted to jump in. So definitely agree with everything John just said there. And when I think about it, I do think about it in terms of three things, right? Which is the first response time, time to resolution, and then that overall kind of customer happiness and, customer satisfaction. And so I love that idea of focusing on what are your key metrics, and then whether it's, quarterly cadence, monthly cadence, how do you kind of get really lean and agile in moving the needle on that? And then that can be through hiring, through tools, through more process. But having that North Star of what the customer cares about is always really important.
Yeah, love that. I want to move into the technology side of things. For a second, I want to tee this up with my experience as a customer service manager. We had really good people. We had Colton, Brennan, and Sylvia on our team. Just a little bit of backstory. Colton had been with us since the beginning of the company. It has saw us evolve from being a one product company to 3 different software products serving 3 different industries, and really knew everything about the products. He was doing everything from product demonstration to tier 1 support up to technical bugging and everything like that. As we started to scale, we hired more people, and we thought that, we'll just duplicate Colton, right? What happened is we created the processes. I literally looked at time to first response, right? How long was it taking us to get to a customer? And then we were looking at average response time, but we still weren't making a difference. And part of it was that I didn't have the technology necessary to enable our new support teams. I'm not going to tell you what tools we were using, because all 3 of you would probably look less of me, just because they're not. I definitely don't want to go into that. But the reality is Colton had something that we couldn't teach the other agents, and that was tribal knowledge. He knew the customers. He had been on the phone with thousands of customers over the course of 7 years, and we couldn't pass that on, and we didn't have the tools to help that. Dion, when you talk about tools, wrapping all this together, you talk about hiring the right people, outsourcing, doing it internally, having the processes, value chains, activity, like what do you look at when it comes to tools? How do you decide what you automate, what you keep as a human to human interaction? How do you go about looking at tools and putting the right pieces in place?
Yeah, so there are 2 things that I think about when it comes to tools. So first and foremost, and a lot of people ask the question, hey, what do you look at from an automation perspective? The way I like to start the conversation is from a human perspective. This is both your customers, your end users, as well as your agents, right? So for example, what is the work that your agents are doing that they probably don't need to be doing, and that they could spend more time working with customers, focusing on being empathetic rather than, say, for example, triaging, classifying, tagging tickets or things like that, right? And so there are going to be a ton of inefficiencies in the process. And it usually starts by asking people, where are they spending most of their time? Or, for example, on the customer side, what's preventing them from getting their issue solved? So the first thing I would say is always start thinking about people. And then the second is more of a mindset. One of the jokes, for example, in like a finance function is that the majority of finance teams run out of Excel, out of spreadsheets. And there's tons of great technology that can enable a finance team to move more quickly. And so I always like to ask myself, where am I operating out of Excel? Whether that's literally or figuratively, as we talked about, the natural kind of status quo, the natural progression for most companies is actually an inefficient one. Most teams, unless you are very deliberate about looking for ways to create efficiency, you're going to default to inefficiency. And so you end up finding these giant companies that are running their support probably literally in spreadsheets, don't have the right CRM setup, don't have CRM support, don't have analytics or things like that. And so I think just remembering those 2 principles, that you have to be very, very active in order to create these efficiencies. And then where do you find them is by starting by looking at the people and where they're spending their time and where they could be leveraged more. And you often find a ton of these things. And I mentioned a couple. So, triaging, analytics, things like that. But we can definitely dive into a lot more.
Yeah, +1 for Dion. I totally agree with him. Totally.
Thanks, John.
Okay, so we're coming up on time. I just posed a question to see if anyone on the panel, or excuse me, any of the guests that are here listening, if you have a question, please let us know. We're gonna close up here in a couple minutes. And so one thing that I wanted to give everyone an opportunity to do in these last couple minutes is first off, like when you think about agility, I would like each of you to give me your, like, if I could give any organization, whether they're small, medium, large enterprises, like, here's what I would do. John, let's just have you talk about, like, if I'm managing a small customer service team. Zendesk, you guys service such a wide range of customers, teams of 1 to 2 agents to large enterprises with hundreds of agents, right? But if you could focus on like the 1 or 2 tips that you would give a small organization, like, this is the thing you need to focus on tomorrow, right? Alan, if you could look at kind of that next size, that not necessarily a small team, but a mid-level company, when you think about what they should be doing, what they should be looking at, what should they look at going to implement tomorrow, and then beyond larger enterprises. I specifically, like, I'm thinking about some of the recent customers, like Acorns, Instacart, some of the things that your team has done recently. Like, you have a lot of experience with larger enterprises, helping them become more agile. And so if you could each take 2 or 3 minutes, but then also tell the audience how they can go learn about your organization as well. What are the 1 or 2 things you would do for that market? And then if they feel like they want to go learn more, how do they find out about your organization?
Great, I'll jump right in. So for a smaller business thinking about how they can be agile, what should they be thinking about? One is, don't boil the ocean. Start small, get your strategic wins, make sure your customers are happy, and think about where you're heading next from a product standpoint and a company standpoint. As the company brand grows and you get more and more customers, are you prepared for that next round of hiring, and what kind of skills are you going to need to focus on? So I would look at that, start small, focus on the key strategies in terms of where you're heading, and then look at how you're staffing to meet the complexity of the product and growth moving forward.
Perfect. Alan, you want to go next?
Sure. John, I didn't know if you wanted to layer in how to get in touch with Zendesk.
Yeah, it's true.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. Zendesk.com. And if you, obviously you can look me up on LinkedIn as well. If you have any specific questions after this, feel free to just connect with me on LinkedIn. John Kearney, Zendesk Vice President for Customer Advocacy.
All right, I'll jump in. So for a mid-sized company, all right, a couple of things I would say. You've built something now, you're growing, you have something to protect. So it's not persistence, mere existence, and persistence is not what it's all about anymore. So I would start in your planning, think about the black swan, think about the outlier. You have something to protect, you have assets that you don't want to bet the farm on if you have a serious risk event. So you want to think about resiliency. But it's also time, as you're scaling, you're growing, it's time to start thinking about knowledge base. You want to start capturing that tribal knowledge and baking it into something. I'm a big fan of the method Dion alluded to earlier of democratizing that and letting your agent pool play a significant role in capturing knowledge and documenting that. And then it's also the information architecture that goes alongside of your knowledge base. But these 2 steps, when you're mid-size, set you up for that future state where you can lay really sophisticated AI and powerful tools on top of it. It's much harder to do before you have a knowledge base. It's not impossible, but I would recommend, if you haven't done that and you're a mid-sized company, protect your assets with resiliency planning, get your knowledge base going, think about your information architecture. So if you have a lot of different systems, use the same nomenclature throughout so you can match databases together from disparate sources and stuff. Think about your outsourcing and scaling strategy. It may be time for you to mature into that, where you need diversification now. You need the ability to scale up and down as needed. And then how to learn more about Arena, you can check us out at arenacx.com. Anyone's welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn or send an email to just info@ArenaCX.
Thank you. Love that. You talked about information architecture and knowledge base. Just want to throw out a big plug for the last webinar. A couple of weeks ago, we did a webinar around discussion of human plus machine, the future of customer service, and really dove deep into the discussion of information architecture and knowledge base, and really having the data there. And so for anybody on this call, if you want to learn more about that, we have an hour-long webinar where we dug deep into that just a couple of weeks ago. And so if you haven't seen that, reach out to ArenaCX or Forethought. We can make sure you get a copy of that. Dion, do you want to go next?
Yeah, for sure. So we talked about small companies, medium-sized companies. When you start to become a very large-scale company, that's when things get very, very interesting, particularly around scale. So it somewhat depends on your growth curve. Are you still in kind of a convex up or a linear or a convex down curve, so to speak? That changes the frame of the problems. But the way to attack those problems is always the same, right? So at some point, you're going to start crossing that 20, 50, 100 agent mark. You're going to start crossing that 1,000 tickets per week mark. And that's when you start looking at creating these efficiencies. When you start looking at tools, obviously here at Forethought, we provide AI technology. That's usually the time where you're going to want to start looking into things like artificial intelligence or other systems, for example, conversational interfaces, things like that, and starting to get better analytics, because you're going to stop knowing what you don't know. And so you're going to want to start implementing and instrumenting your systems so that you can continue to either, continue that scale or that upward trajectory, or if you're in kind of the other curves, start to reduce costs, which is what you start to look at when you're pre-IPO or post-IPO company. So again, the problems will be different depending on what kind of company you are, whether you're high growth unicorn, et cetera. But this is usually the time when you should start thinking about driving efficiencies, bringing in automation, bringing in technology, and either increasing leverage or increasing efficiency. And then how to get in touch. Feel free to email me at Deon, Forethought.ai, or go to our website, Forethought.ai, to request a demo. I'm also available on LinkedIn, so don't hesitate to shoot me a LinkedIn invite, add a note, and I'm pretty responsive.
Awesome, perfect. We just had a question come in. If you guys don't mind, take two. If you want someone wants to answer this, I think it's a good question. How can you keep your customer service team motivated when you do training regarding their performance? Me personally, my motivation usually revolves around food, specifically tacos, but this is not my area of expertise. And my guess is you guys have a lot better answer than I do. So would one of you guys like to answer that?
Yeah, I can quickly answer and then give folks time as well. I say inspire them to understand their charter, what they're there for. And it's really to help customers resolve issues so that they can leverage your products and services to increase their business and revenue. So be inspiring, help them understand the end. It's not just closing a ticket. It's really helping a customer grow market share, realize their revenue targets and growth and things of that nature. So that's the approach I take.
Love it. I think customer service agents, they don't get as much love as they need and deserve. Customer service really that's the biggest billboard for your company. And so making sure they understand that you guys, that they are oftentimes the first interaction and the most common interaction they have with the company. So they make a big impact in regards to overall customer satisfaction and the customers wanting to come back. I was having a conversation with actually my previous company where we talked about customer satisfaction, and the main reason I go to a specific restaurant is not the food, but the way that I'm treated as a customer. And I think that can be said across all organizations. So I think having them understand that they play a massive role in the customer success goes a long way. So I want to say thanks for, first of all, John, Alan, and Dion for taking the time. You guys are all super busy CEOs and VP of Zendesk. And so being able to come here and meet with myself and everybody in our audience, thank you so much. I also appreciate everyone who came to take an hour of the day to listen to the discussion. And if you have any questions after this, I will put a slide up that shows everybody's contact information. We have Ty Yelich from Zendesk is our point of contact there if you have sales related questions. So that's why we have have his information up here. If you want to speak with John directly, as he said, John Kearney on LinkedIn, you can feel free to reach out to him. So thank you so much. This will be the end of this webinar discussion, and we'll look forward to seeing you all in the next one.
Thanks, Chet.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.